Good morning. Wonderful to see you all on this rainy day. Looking forward to the bike blessing. We're going to do some traveling today through space and time, science and religion, mysticism, history, and possibility. So buckle your seatbelts and hang on for the ride. Most of you know that I am both an ordained Soto Zen Buddhist priest and now, thanks to you, an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. People who don't know UU and have only experienced more mainstream religion will sometimes say to me, open-mouthed, "How is that possible?" To them, it sounds like a contradiction. Some weird, multi-headed hybrid monster that surely is not sanctioned by the denomination that I am part of. Well, you and I know better. But I think it's worth a deeper exploration of why, just why this is possible. Why, in fact, it is utterly true to our tradition, and why we, this little religious movement of about 162,000 people around the world, may hold a key to a better world. An understanding that recognizes the inherent unity of all things, and at the same time, the beauty and the wonder, the necessity even, of great diversity. From gnats to elephants, from ranchers to environmentalists, even from Unitarians to Southern Baptists. So, in that spirit, this sermon title is The Play of Oneness and Diversity. Perhaps in the reading from the late UU minister, the Reverend Forrest Church, you caught a glimpse of this play in the parable of the stained glass windows of the great cathedral. The same light comes in each window, but there are a nearly infinite number of windows, each one unique, each one changing the light in its own way. This is truly one of the most important teachings of Unitarian Universalism, and it sets us apart from almost all of the other Western religious traditions, which tell us there is just one light, the light of God, and there is just one window, the right window, of Methodism, Shia Islam, Catholicism, or Orthodoxy, and all the other windows are false. Or, if not false, if, say, you're a liberal, at least somewhat, shall we say, politely misguided. Many of us grew up in one of those traditions, and it's thoroughly part of our culture. So this view that celebrates all the windows in the cathedral is radical, at odds with several thousand years of Western monotheistic history. And it takes a little getting used to. No wonder we struggle a little to explain what UU is when our neighbors and friends ask us. So let's talk about oneness first, the light we all share. Given the many views of reality that we surely have in this very room, on what grounds can we say there is inherent oneness? Actually, you've got a little hint of it in the story that I read to the children. For that, I'm afraid, I'm going to have to take us back about 13.7 billion years, give or take a few billion, when we are told by the physicists, all that is and ever will be was contained in one singularity. That is actually the word that's used, singularity. Something beyond small, of infinite density and temperature, like the seed in the story I told. Do Do you remember the periodic table from your high school or college chemistry or physics classes? There are 94 naturally occurring elements found in nature, and of these, guess how many existed for the first fairly long period of the universe? Mostly just two, helium and hydrogen, and a little tiny bit of lithium. If any of you have ever taken lithium, if you're bipolar, you're actually taking one of the original substances of the universe. The helium you use to blow up a balloon existed within the first 3 minutes of the formation of the universe. Almost everything, however, that makes up our bodies and the world around us formed in the explosion of massive dying stars, long, long after that first moment. As Britain's Astronomer Royal Sir Martin Rees said, we are literally the ashes of long dead stars. And as the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson wrote, we are not simply in the universe, we are born from it. Nearly every atom of every body in this room, and these walls, and that big mountain out there, and those flowering trees, and the dandelions, was once part of the core of one star, a star infinitely older than our own sun. And we know now from genetic studies that all of us, all living human beings alive today, descend in an unbroken line on their mother's side and through the mothers of those mothers, and so on, back to one woman who is estimated to have lived between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago in East Africa. That's a finger snap in the history of the universe. If the whole history of planet Earth was an hour, that would be the last 1 or 2 seconds of that hour, 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. We are so recent a species that we have less genetic diversity than most of the animal species on this planet. We are stunningly alike, utterly related to one another. And there are all the ways that we're dependent on one another and on all the processes of the world for our survival, from the breath we take to the food we eat. We would be one, we sang earlier today. But that implies that there's some choice about being one. We are one. It's not a matter of would be. And scientists and mystics agree on this. Mystics are people who, through accident or deep contemplation, have a direct experience of this oneness, who experience an overwhelming sense of unity, the usual boundaries between self and the world, self and other, self and God, dissolving. Mystics have been causing trouble for fundamentalists and other rigid religious types for centuries, since mystical experience undercuts tradition, hierarchy, and sacred scripture. All religions have their mystics. The Muslim Sufis, the Jewish Kabbalists, Christian mystics, Taoists in their mountain caves, Hindu followers of Shivaism. Everywhere you can find them, in caves and monasteries, on the edges, underground, often persecuted. But we now know that mysticism is not just the realm of professional contemplatives. Many, many of us have these experiences, often as children, sometimes through a close call with death, or through psychedelics. People have had these experiences. You may remember such an experience. And if you do, you remember it for your whole life, even if it only lasted for a moment. I remember my Ugandan brother-in-law describing what happened after he had been terribly injured after being hit by a car. He experienced being held in such immeasurable love and perfection that his fear of dying completely dissolved. And that lack of fear has led him to a life of astonishing acts of humanitarian courage. Mysticism is part of our human heritage, part of our own hearts. So back to Unitarian Universalism. Both of the rather unwieldy words in our name start with uni, the same root as unity, union, universe, the Latin prefix for one. Sometimes when people ask what we believe, which is of course a trick question for UUs, I say that we honor universal ideas of justice and peace and the unity of all people and the earth. That's my elevator speech. From their beginnings in the early 19th century, Unitarians worked tirelessly for the benefit of all people, whether that was the abolition of slavery or the rights of women and the working poor. Universalists were among the first to honor the truth of all religions. Reverend Forrest Church considered himself primarily a Universalist. That is our particular religious heritage, something to truly, truly celebrate in this world of inequality and interreligious hatreds. But there are some pitfalls here in this unity idea. We now know that beneath those lovely unifying sentiments, there is a kind of violence done when we say, oh, all religions are the same, or all people are really the same. Because it is of the nature of things, whether species or religions, to take many forms. And these forms are precious and irreplaceable. I worked much of my life to protect endangered plants because each of those plants represented hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to create just that form. You might say, what difference does it make to the world whether Umtanum wild buckwheat exists or not? And on one level, you're right. But on another level, something is lost in a monoculture. How do you feel when you stand in the middle of a forest? How do you feel in the middle of a cornfield? Now I realize not all of you may have been in the middle of a cornfield, but I grew up in the Midwest, and that's where we played, in the middle of cornfields. And I could tell you, they're just a little bit creepy, because each hybrid corn plant is virtually indistinguishable from another, and they go on and on to the horizon. Do we want a world of just cornfields? We now know that our survival depends on a vibrant and diverse world, and that diversity and resilience go hand in hand, whether you're talking about ecological systems or human communities. Monocultures are dangerous and fragile. One disease, like the one that affected the Irish potatoes, can take out 1 million people. But diversity is not always like a beautiful forest. I'm sure there are days, and maybe particularly in this political season, when many of us long for a world where everyone sees things as we do, which surely must be the best way to understand things. The founders of the U.S. Constitution, many of them Unitarian in their views, understood that it is precisely in that maddening range of understandings, in the free play of dissenting views, that a true democracy is possible. And it's lasted more than 200 years. Just like those founders of the United States, we come together in the faith and belief that each person has a right to walk their own true spiritual path. And there is strength in coming together as a community without erasing our differences, as hard as it is for others to understand what we are. Our chalice is a symbol of this beautiful and difficult path. The stem is our own individual, deep connection with the sacred, however we understand that. The wide bowl can hold many understandings, can hold the whole world. And the union of the individual and the communal lights a flame that can dispel the darkness of violence and hatred. I've been reading a book called To Re-Enchant the World, a philosophy of Unitarian Universalism, by a theology professor and UU, Dr. Richard Grigg. He writes, contemporary Unitarian Universalism, with its unique ability to bring together a plethora of different spiritualities within a single community, is a particularly powerful site for the re-enchantment of the world, for the rebirth of the sacred. We are on a solitary journey together, and it is through this mix of pluralism and unity that the sacred is reborn. I feel this myself, the great potential for Unitarian Universalism to both heal and re-enchant this world. But my greatest concern for us is that we UUs always have tendencies to become a club rather than a force for true transformation. A club of white, well-educated, really, really nice middle-class liberals. Now, there's nothing wrong with clubs, per se. But when people show up in our midst who don't fit in our club, who embarrass us or make us uncomfortable, will we consciously or unconsciously push them away? Last week, I was up at Aspen Chapel for a Holocaust memorial service shared between the Aspen Chapel community and the Aspen Jewish community. And there was a person in a wheelchair there, perhaps with cerebral palsy. And he sang with the choir. But he also made other sounds that some might have found disruptive. And I found myself thinking, would we be big enough of heart to embrace this person if he came to our community? Or would we be uncomfortable or annoyed? Would he feel welcome here? Would a homeless person be welcome here? Someone who didn't have easy access to a shower? What would we do if one of us became homeless? Would a child with Down syndrome be welcome here? How about a transgender Christian who grew up in a traditional Protestant denomination that now rejects her, who still feels herself a Christian, but has no other religious home who welcomes her? As the song we heard asks us, would you harbor me? Would I harbor you? Would you harbor a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a heretic, convict, or spy? Would you harbor a Tubman, a Garrett, a Truth, a fugitive, or a slave? Would you harbor me? Would I harbor you? I invite you, as a community and as individuals, to ask yourself these questions and keep asking them and keep being transformed by them. As I said when I began, I think Unitarian Universalism could show the world a way of being that could literally change the world, an understanding that recognizes the inherent unity of all things and at the same time, the beauty and wonder, the necessity even, of great diversity, religious, spiritual, cultural, racial. But this isn't for the weak of heart. This is a path of courage, determination, and spirit, rising above discomfort and habit, and opening the heart again and again and again. Unitarian Universalism is a spiritual practice as deep and wide as any in the world, if we choose to embrace what it really, really is. May we do so. That is my prayer for all of us.